This is a discussion of bureaucracy and a quick set of slides about how we use this term, what we mean by it, and a description and discussion of the federal bureaucracy. First, the term bureaucracy is used several ways, and I want to just clarify by talking about four of these ways. First, for sociologists and political scientists, bureaucracy is a form of human organization. The term itself was first coined by a guy named Max Weber, writing in the 19th century. And he put these two parts of the word together: bureaucracy, bureau meaning something like office or desk, and cracy, that root meaning rule by, to signify the notion that the procedures of this form of human organization are so compelling that in some way they end up ruling us. The form of human organization he was talking about has several different principles. And together they form a way of organizing which is the most efficient way to have a large group of people together complete a complex task. Three of these principles include hierarchical decision-making, job specialization, and formal rules or standard procedures. Standard procedures like you might find in an assembly line, job specialization, the notion that everybody in the organization has a particular job to do that together adds up to a completed task. Now, Max Weber thought that this was a compelling way to organize ourselves, and it is so compelling that it almost produces a kind of an iron cage. It's irresistible. And it characterizes all large organizations, private corporations as well as governments. So if you think of the DMV, certainly that's a part of a bureaucracy. There are specific ways that they fill out the forms and things that you're supposed to have with you in order to get a driver's license, and result in the end in a system of driver's licenses. But so is the Apple Store. Apple as a corporation is a bureaucracy. It's organized on bureaucratic principles. So it's the most efficient way of producing a B-2 bomber and an iPhone. You wouldn't make an iPhone using consensus decision making. And so sometimes we use the term bureaucracy, we're using it this way. But we also, quite often, when we think about about a bureaucracy, we don't think of the Apple Store as a bureaucracy or the Apple employees as bureaucrats. And in this sense, we're talking about this special kind of inefficiencies that sometimes you do get with a public bureaucracy, but not because it's organized on bureaucratic principles, but because it's a public entity. So, for instance, the lack of profit as a criterion sometimes makes it difficult to evaluate expenditures. It makes it difficult to, figure out the best way to spend money in a public bureaucracy. We also know that in a public bureaucracy there are certain extra rules that sometimes we refer to as red tape, which are necessary for accountability and transparency, for instance. So, for instance, if you have a city that wants to offer low-interest loans to homeowners in order to renovate their properties, a loan like that, if it's made by a private bank, they don't really care that much how you spend the money as long as you pay it back, right? But, a public entity, a government that's going to give those kinds of loans out, is given out specifically so that you can increase the value of your home, and that contributes to the overall economic situation in the city. And so they want to know for sure that you're actually spending the money that way. And so they're going to make you fill out a ton of forms. They're going to come out and check and inspect and look at the work that you're doing and require you to do all kinds of photos and things like that. So we think of this as red tape, but it's specifically so that the money itself, the expenditures, are accountable, and it's done in a transparent way. Democracy can also slow down decision making in a public bureaucracy because it requires lots of public input. Now, sometimes when we use the term bureaucracy, we're referring specifically to government workers, and specifically to that set of government workers which are members of the civil service. In government, we make a distinction between political appointees and civil service. Sometimes we call those professionals, sometimes career or merit employees. And this distinction arose in the 1880s with the Pendleton Act and a beginning of a move away from the spoils system when jobs were given to political supporters, basically, as a payoff for getting somebody elected. Today, only about 5% of government jobs overall, in general, are political jobs, meaning that elected officials can appoint people to those positions because of their political opinions. And these are the people that set the policy. So if you look in the executive branch of government, the heads of the administrative agencies are all political appointees, and the first 2 or 3 levels of organizational hierarchy are as well. But most of the employees, around 95% or so, are civil service. They can't be hired or fired because of their political views, but only because of their expertise. And these people keep their jobs when the politicians change. New people are elected. And so it produces a situation where sometimes civil service employees know a lot more than political appointees about how programs run. And so they need some flexibility in order to do their jobs. But it also introduces the question about how much discretion they should be given. Sometimes, they can carry out their own preferences rather than that of the political appointees. And this can, of course, is a problem because the government is supposed to turn on politicians and elections. Sometimes we use this term to refer simply to the executive branch, and so I want to talk about the federal bureaucracy a little bit more. I'll just give you a quick sense of how the executive branch in the federal government is organized. You have the president, the executive office of the president, cabinet departments, and these are all the cabinet departments, and many different independent agencies and government corporations. Some of these are regulatory agencies, and some are independent for other reasons. And I want to talk about these in terms of the history in which they were added as cabinet departments. And you can see the growth in the responsibility of the federal government. This line here tracks federal employees, numbers of federal employees, and starts back here in 1814 out to 2004. And you can see this bump here. Of course, this is the FDR administration. The number of federal employees goes from around 1 million to almost 4 million in just a few years. It drops back down after the economy starts to improve after World War II is completed. These are all the make-work programs associated with the New Deal. So the number of federal employees that we have hasn't grown very much since the late 1940s. There's a couple of bumps up when we are hiring civilian employees around wartime, but for the most part it stays pretty steady. Now the four original functions, Justice Department, the State Department, these are the diplomats, the Treasury Department, and the Defense Department. These are original four agencies. In the 1850s, we added new functions having to do with the expansion westward and the acquisition of land by the federal government. And we set up the Department of the Interior. And this department oversees still today federal land, including the National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, resource extraction programs, and things like that. In the 1880s to the beginning of the 20th century, we set up several other agencies that we refer to as clientele agencies. These are agencies whose purpose is to help various interests in society. So we have the Agriculture Department set up to help to implement laws that were going to be helping the farmers, the Commerce Department, and the Labor Department. And then it's a while before we get another agency. That's Health and Human Services in the 1950s, HUD in the 1960s, Housing and Urban Development. So these are agencies that are implementing programs around what we call the New Society, the Great Society period. This is the period mostly of the Johnson administration, when we are setting up two of the most important health programs in the country. The Medicare and Medicaid is set up in 1965, and they are placed in the Health and Human Services Department. And housing and programs having to do with urban development also as a part of this Great Society period. And then a couple of infrastructure agencies, transportation and energy, the Education Department in the late 1970s, Veterans Administration, and most recently Homeland Security, which was one of the most extensive reorganizations of the federal government. Functions from many different agencies were drawn together into the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. Now these are the cabinet departments, but we also have many independent agencies. Just talk about a few of these. And you can see that they're kind of clumped together in these two periods here. We refer to this as the first wave of federal regulation, and this is the second wave. Some of these independent agencies include the Federal Reserve, which is kept separate from many cabinet departments. We certainly don't want politicians influencing the activities of the Federal Reserve, setting interest rates and printing money and inflation. Those should be outside political control. But all of these do have some appointments that are made by the president in various staggered terms. And some of these have agency heads that actually can't be removed by the president. Cabinet departments, they can be removed by the president, but not some of these agencies, especially the regulatory agencies. In this category, we also have the Social Security Administration. Social Security, it was set up in the 1930s, like we've talked about before, but it has always since then been kept as its own entity with a separate budget and separate accounting. Two of FDI, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Securities and Exchange Commission, these are also independent agencies, regulatory functions that were set up after the New Deal, or during the New Deal period, in order to regulate the financial sector, try to avoid great depressions in the future. Also, the National Labor Relations Board is set up during this period. Now, this is the entity that's going to oversee unions. And the decision was made not to put it in any cabinet department, including commerce or labor, because it was supposed to be sort of a neutral arbiter between labor and commerce. So we keep it outside of both of those. We also have the Federal Communications Commission. In the middle of this period, the CIA and NASA are set up as agencies, independent agencies. The CIA, of course, is kept separate from the Defense Department. The Defense Department includes uniformed soldiers, and so they're entitled to the kind of protections that uniformed soldiers have. They keep at arm's length from the CIA, which is not part of the uniformed service. NASA also is kept separate from the Department of Defense. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is set up to have a civilian presence in space. And it's important to keep that separate from the Defense Department. Now, we have research on rockets that takes place in NASA and in the Defense Department, but that research is kept completely separate, pretty much a firewall between them to maintain that independence. The second wave of regulation has to do with protection of consumers and citizens in certain kinds of social aspects. So we have the Federal Elections Commission, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Environmental Protection Agency. All of these are representing this kind of new priorities that come in the 1960s and 1970s with the environmental movement, the civil rights movement, and consumer movement, safety protection movements as well. Now, the last thing I want to do is have you think a little bit about which of these cabinet departments that we have here you think might be the largest by budget, right? Just take a minute to think about which one of these cabinet departments might have the largest budgets. And you should know the three largest. Certainly, one of the largest is the Defense Department. And remember, all federal spending together is about $4 trillion. The Defense Department in recent years has been about $650 billion or so. So it's one of the largest three. Another very large department is HHS, Health and Human Services. That's where we find Medicare and Medicaid. Their budget in the most recent year was over $1 trillion, so a quarter of the federal budget. Another very large, by budget, cabinet department that you might not have expected is the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department has quite a large budget because most of its expenditures go to paying the national debt, paying interest on the debt. And in recent years, that's been between $450 and $500 billion a year. So it's quite a big chunk of money. Some of the other departments, if you're curious, the Education Department, for instance, in recent years, about $90 billion. Most of that in higher education, loans and grants, and also in aid to low-income K-12 schools around the country. Another very large entity is Social Security. We've mentioned that already. Social Security in recent years is about $800 billion, but it's not in any cabinet department, kept separately. But you can get a sense of just how inflexible the budget is. Social Security, HHS, that's together about $2 trillion, half the budget. Treasury Department, another $500 billion, that's $2.5 trillion. And if you put on top of that the Defense Department, you're already at more than 75% of the budget just with those four entities.